So welcome back, everybody. I hope you've managed to have a stretch and a break. It's my pleasure to just draw us back to the room to remind you that we're now operating in the chat box, and there's been some great comment already, and Maria has been putting in some useful resources on the subject of academic research as an independent scholar, so please check that out. It's my pleasure to hand back over to Claire so that she can take us introduce Kate.
Thanks very much, Liz. That's great. Yes, it's great to be here. We have at the University of London at the moment, and I think it's just still going on, a nomination box for amazing women. And the recommendation is that you can just drop into our in the box any amazing women that you want to recommend. And the guidance, quite rightly, is to nominate amazing women, perhaps below the ranks of senior women. Well, Kate Daubney is definitely an amazing woman and should certainly be nominated, even if she's not allowed to be. When Kate and I first met, I thought I have to find an opportunity to meet with this woman, to work with this woman, and to work with her team. So I'm very pleased to be able to welcome her to this event formally at this stage, and also I look forward to listening to her keynote. So Kate Dobney is a PhD herself. She's the director of the Careers Group, which is a federation of careers services of many of the University of London federal members, as we call them. She has been a former academic for 7 years at the universities of Derby and my former university, Leeds. So maybe that's why we like each other. Her PhD was in film music, so there's another musicologist. And she developed a pioneering approach to critical and historical film musicology that centered on the manuscript and audio texts of the score and soundtracks through a series of books. She spent 2 years at the LSE as careers advisor to PhDs and postdoctoral researchers, and she still retains that interest as part of her portfolio career now. But she's also a more recently published researcher on employability in the curriculum and is a principal fellow of the Higher Education Academy for her work in this area. So from Crave to Cradle, unpacking the value of English. Over to you, Kate. I'm so pleased that we've had this opportunity to work together at last.
Hooray! Claire, thank you for that lovely and very warm introduction. I'd very much like to thank you and the community of colleagues here in the Institute of English, in which I'm currently sitting. This is where you loan me an office, so I'm actually on the corridor, for inviting me to participate in such an important event today. And I've been so inspired so far by everything I've heard. And I feel incredibly fortunate to be in the company of esteemed scholars, of researchers, of postdocs and PhDs, whose love for their subject and disciplinary home is celebrated in the Institute and far beyond, I think, across the humanities and related areas. And I suspect that a bit like the military, you can take a scholar out of research, but you can never really take research out of the scholar. And that's certainly true for me, having left my original academic career over 20 years ago. I find myself with 2 recently published peer-reviewed journal articles and a book on a completely different topic altogether. I think we're incredibly fortunate to have Liz Wilkinson's expertise, passion, and enthusiasm for working with our students and researchers across the School of Advanced Study here at the University of London on their careers education and employability development, as well as having a network of careers professionals supporting humanities scholars across our universities in the University of London Federation and the South East of England. And I know many of them are with us today. So I want to talk a little bit about something that I know Liz manifests in every activity or interaction with our Institute of English students, which I'm absolutely sure is echoed in the practice of all of our careers colleagues. How can we recognise the value of English as your discipline, and how can you do that? Whatever career or careers in the plural that you go on to pursue, whether with intention or by accident. Questions like this reside within my second research and professional life. And as a former humanities academic myself in film musicology, as Claire mentioned, these are something which resonate in a broader disciplinary context, I think. So I hope that you'll indulge me a little today, but also hear something that resonates with you, whatever your subject. I think there's a sort of paradox at play here, because while scholarship celebrates narrowing to a constellation of pinheads of individual areas of expertise, I think we also need, in the contemporary academic environment, to recognize the likelihood or the probability of researchers leaving the academy during or after a research experience. That may be by choice, and that's certainly the decision that I made after 7 years of being an academic at Derby and then at Leeds at the start of my career. In all honesty, I had fallen out of love with my subject, and I felt that I'd reached the end of that particular journey. I'm fortunate to have a happenstance mindset, and so I've stumbled along happily for another 25 years, making the most of every opportunity, and here I am. But not everyone has that privilege of being able to make a positive choice to leave higher education and research, because that is the reality of our unstable, ambiguous professional space. One that I think is shaped increasingly by poor salaries, 0 hours contracts, and regulation. And in that context, we must therefore support our researchers to be able to recognize, articulate, and translate the value of being English researchers in other contexts, not just those proximate to the academy and universities or proximate to the discipline, but possibly far removed in sectors unimaginably unrelated. The word employability, therefore, is at risk of sounding like a necessary evil, a life raft perhaps, or even a noose. Because the implication is that a professional identity formed around one of those starry pinpoints of expertise, excuse me, in the great disciplinary constellation is obliterated by the swirling space debris of employment as a practical reality. Now, I know that's a terrible metaphor, but the point that I want to make is that in moving from being a researcher to doing something else, it implies that something is lost in the transition, something of your identity that is deeply personal and precious. Alongside that, we are also witnessing what are, to me, increasingly political and deeply troubling arguments about the value of the humanities. So there are political reasons why we might want to review some of the contention around employability as a word. Indeed, in my extraordinarily privileged position of being able to advise universities around the world on ways in which employability and curriculum do not merely coexist, but have a mutually powerful and symbiotic relationship, I have taken to removing the word employability from my presentations and focusing instead on the word value. And that's what I want to explore briefly today. Because English does not only represent the value of the humanities in cultural richness, in diversity of perspectives, in celebrating the unknown and the ambiguous, while simultaneously opening the door to new common understanding across cultures. But when we articulate the disciplinary qualities, values, behaviors, and transferable skills of English and its related disciplines, we can immediately understand why value can be used as a synonym for employability. It's not that the arguments around the value of the humanities disciplines in and of themselves are weak or invalid, far from it, but we must recognize the persistent narratives of the landscape so that we can also find inescapable arguments for those who will only see humanities through the lens of other deeply embedded preconceptions like the skills gap and the fourth industrial revolution and 21st century skills, and thus determine the irrelevance of the humanities when viewed through such lenses. I don't think it's difficult to make a strong case for the value of the transferable skills of research and communication that are common across all disciplines. But that's not really what I'm talking about here, any more than when we talk about the skills undergraduates develop during their degrees, we focus on just the skills of teaching, learning, time management, and socializing. I'm talking instead of those skills that are innate to the discipline. What does it mean to study English, to identify as someone whose identity is embedded in, inspired by, shaped by, and resonant with English? We've heard some wonderful examples from our panel members today, and I'll suggest some answers to my question in a moment. But I want to share with you a little of how it is that I arrived at thinking of disciplines in this way, not just English, but every academic discipline, both in higher education and pre-18 education. Conversations about employability, particularly in universities, usually take place in a state of contention or hostility, particularly when academics get together with careers professionals, or worse still, with whoever in the university has planned a strategy for employability. While the Institute of English has been nothing but welcoming to our colleague Liz Wilkinson, there is a prevailing anxiety in the academic research and teaching community about employability being stuffed into the curriculum space. I think this stuffing is what people fear when they think about embedding employability in curriculum, because to embed is to fix firmly and deeply, something that doesn't belong there, something that's felt strongly or is difficult to change. And that implies that employability is somehow a fixed entity, a hostile and unwelcome one at that. And yet if we think of it instead as value and as something to be surfaced out rather than added in, we immediately understand it as enduring and meaningful. Indeed, when we think about an educational experience, we all want the same thing, whoever we are. We want students to love their educational experience and be able to articulate and benefit from its value in the longer term. That is indisputable. And we know that you are all highly employable. As our panelists have so ably and compellingly shared over the last hour, you get good jobs. They may or may not be close to your disciplinary pinpoint in the research constellation or to your career plans today. And you may change those career plans by design or by inevitable consequence of circumstances you can't control. But if you take one thought away from today, it is to recognize that English and its related disciplines, as studied by you as researchers, give you so much value that you can recognize and benefit from in so many contexts. So let's think about what that value might look like. The obvious place to start when working with researchers who may be focused on text is to think of the array of cognitive skills around contextualization, connection, and comparison, the development, application, and interpretation of perspectives, the analysis of text through theories, methods, or techniques, and the approaches to critical analysis that seek the development of a deep understanding of text, experience, and authorial intention. You do so by arguing and making decisions, gathering and presenting evidence verbally, and also increasingly through diverse media forms and languages. You are creators and curators. You view through disciplinary lenses from the humanities to the more scientific and data-driven, where language itself is considered. And then you communicate by persuading and influencing, questioning and listening, constructing and deconstructing texts of your own, building rapport and relationships with reader and listener, speaker and writer. You are outward-looking, curious, expressive and empathetic, passionate yet reflective. You are not merely tolerant of ambiguity and uncertainty, but you actively seek it out and celebrate it. You think independently and take risks intellectually. You perceive holistically and engage interculturally. And that is before we even consider your skills as a researcher and an educator. All these skills and attributes are themselves just categories, not individually iterated and identified. And you bring all these transferable skills and attributes to all your possible future careers, which explains exactly why you are so employable and how much value you bring as students and scholars of English. Now, I don't think that most of you will have entered your undergraduate degree because that is what you knew, thought, or imagined that the study of English offered you. Given what I have learned from working with pre-18 learners and undergraduates over the last 30 years, I'm pretty sure that you chose to study English because you loved it at school or escaped into fiction and language in adolescence. Your imagination was seized by what you read or acted in or learned by heart or wrote yourself. And it was unbearable to think of not taking advantage of the luxury to stay in that place for as long as you could. And rightly so. If there is anything that career guidance theory and practice teaches us, it is that people who study and do what they love are more likely to stick at it and for it to reward them professionally in some way. But how many of you who chose English for those reasons also felt entirely confident of what English offered you as a future career? In the narratives of linearity, which are so prevalent in how people talk about the relationship between subject study and future career choices, you were probably advised about careers with the written word, like journalism or diplomacy, or related careers in the arts. These are all fine careers, but they originate essentially from trying to find longer-term value in the knowledge and specialist skills you have gained, and not from a very different star-studded lineup of attributes and transferable skills. It is no more likely that someone said to you, diplomacy is a great career after English because of all the attributes you will develop in tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty and the desire to engage interculturally, than it is that they said, your skills of gathering evidence and comparison developed through linguistics and etymology make you well suited to a career as a forensic scientist. We don't generally talk like that when we talk about subject study. And neither the language of skills nor the confidence to break away from linearity are present when we do that in the pre-18 space either. It is not the fault of teachers or pre-18 careers professionals, but rather a legacy of a limited understanding of the point and value of curriculum. And it has to be said, an obsession at government and national policy level with the obvious linear solution. Teaching more maths and science is not the quickest route across the skills gap, even if it looks like the most direct one. Helping all learners of all ages understand the array of transferable skills they develop across all subjects is the quickest route, particularly when you make the connections that I have just made. That obsession with linearity and expediency is the source of the obsession with STEM subjects to address the skills gap. And I do not doubt that there is a need for people with the specialist skills of coding and science, given some of the huge opportunities of the fourth industrial revolution and beyond. But did it ever occur to anyone in the policy-making space that the transferable skills of English and the other humanities subjects underpin the development of those specialist skills of coding and science? That those skills of gathering evidence and comparison, of recognizing the patterns of authorial voice and intention, of curating and creating, of swapping in and out of different perspectives, are exactly the skills that enable you to learn those other new areas of specialist knowledge and solve the problems they solve? That isn't why you are here, but some of your unimagined futures lie exactly in those places, should you choose to take a different fork in the road up ahead. It isn't just that humanities graduates can bring those skills and attributes to the transdisciplinary space of the fourth industrial revolution, enhancing the specialist skills of others, bringing creativity to logical scientific thinking, or being able to move between multiple perspectives to define a problem better. That's a wonderful outcome and it's incredibly valuable. But my point is that we should not see that as the only outcome. We should not see that as the only benefit that humanities bring the present and future problems that need solving. My point is that you are also the logical thinkers and problem shapers. You are not looking on from outside. So it is possible when I surfaced those transferable skills and attributes of English a few minutes ago, I might have listed just one that surprised you, experienced as you are in reflection and appreciation of context. But imagine what sharing these insights would do for learners in pre-18 education into what English is, into how rich it is beyond its creative texts and artifacts, and how much value it brings society and the global challenges of the future beyond knowledge. What if, as I've argued in my own peer-reviewed research, we could enable school-age learners to recognize even a fraction of the skills I have just listed when they engage with the curriculum to GCSE, and then articulate and translate those skills into all their possible futures? What power would that give those young people to understand not merely the relevance, but also the value of the subject? And what power would that give them to feel, I can study a subject I love and still solve the world's great problems? I propose that when we think like that, the skills gap is nothing like as big as people fear. It's much more a matter of finding that new perspective, something that scholars and students of English are very good at. Which means that in the same breath as we celebrate the uniqueness of scholarship made possible in the Institute and recognize its privilege for the few, when we surface that huge richness of transferable skills that every learner of English in a global school is developing, we are also embedding social justice for all through the study of English. Because when we add a narrative of the innate skills value of English to our other arguments for the humanities, we not only speak of the value to culture and communication and to humanity, but we recognize that to surface the resilient future value of English through transferable skills, behaviors, qualities, and values is to open up a gateway to the future for all, from grave to cradle. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, Kate. So, yet more inspiration. So I know you have another commitment at 4:00, so we can't keep hold of you, though we'd love to. But just to say thank you for that inspiration. And you have made me look at English in a new way, even this old classicist, as well as I'm sure inspiring all those for whom it is their disciplinary home. So I'd like to thank you, and then to say to everybody, we've got a natural break. We will start again at 4:00. You'll see my slides going up, and to remind you what we're going to be doing. If, having been inspired by our panel and inspired by Kate, you want to now think, well, what does this mean for me? We're now moving into a sort of more teaching careers education session, in which I am joined by one of our IES PhD students, Olivia Baskerville, where we're going to be really saying, well, what does this mean in practice, and addressing some of the questions that were being raised in the panel Q&A earlier. I'd also really like to thank the panel who've gone above and beyond, because they have also been typing in their responses. So if your questions didn't get asked in the open session, it may well now be answered. So it's worth having a check back. So we'll start again formally at 4:00. And I'd just like to say thank you so much, Kate.